wanted to kind of point out that even in his probably the best, and we'll argue afterwards, but the best American novel ever written is probably far afterwards. But in that, there's lots of great points where the novel kind of recommends this new American way of learning about local culture and local knowledge. So I just wanted to read a quick quote from the novel Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and then I'll hand it off to Lindsay. So as you know, Huck and Jim are on the raft, and here's a quote from Huck about what he's learning about local culture on the raft. He says, and Jim said, you must then count the things you're going to cook for dinner, because in local lore that would bring bad luck. The same if you shook the tablecloth after sundown. And he said if a man owned a beehive and that man died, the bees must be told about it before sunup the next morning, or else all the bees would all weaken down and quit work and die. Jim also said that bees wouldn't sting idiots, but I didn't believe that because I tried them lots of times and they wouldn't sting me. So with that, and with bringing Mark Twain in the room, I'll now hand it off to Lindsay Laney, and thank you for this amazing series.
Thank you, Chad. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Laney. I am a faculty member here at Columbia College, and I am a co-chair of our Cultural Enrichment Committee, which has been a partner to bring this amazing speaker series to our college community and to our greater community. I just want to thank a couple of our partners, the Tuolumne Band of Me-Wuk, our Amor partner, Mercedes, who will say a few words here after me, the California State Parks, the Columbia College Foundation, and of course the Tuolumne County Historical Society. So this is the kickoff of our speaker series, Beyond Gold, Stories Across Cultures, and we're just really excited to just share with you this dynamic speaker series of just the interwoven histories of our communities and the contributions of so many cultures before and after the gold rush, which is, you know, the heart of a lot of the communities around here. So I'm going to actually start with our land acknowledgement. So for millennia, indigenous peoples of the southern central Sierra Me-Wuk have honored, protected, and stewarded this land we cherish. We acknowledge the land on which we stand is the unceded traditional home of the central Sierra Me-Wuk peoples, including local sovereign tribal nations such as the Tuolumne Band of Me-Wuk Indians, the Chicken Rancheria Me-Wuk Indians of California, the Southern Sierra Me-Wuk Nation, the Jackson Rancheria Band of Me-Wuk Indians, the Ione Band of Me-Wuk Indians, the California Valley Me-Wuk Tribe, and other California Indian and indigenous peoples who now live here. We recognize the years of ill-conceived policies and the breaking of sacred covenants in regard to Native peoples. In order to bring healing to the land, we acknowledge the wrongs in our history against Native peoples and commit to honoring them and building positive relationships to move toward a brighter future where all peoples of this land live reconciled as interdependent stewards. And with that, I'm going to introduce one of my colleagues, Mercedes Herrera-Tun.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to see many people here today. I was a little concerned that the last storm would not have you come, so thank you for being here. And so we are talking about stories, and I want to start by saying that sometimes nations often tell their stories with two moments: the Declaration of Independence and the signing of independence. And we know that the Declaration of Independence in the United States was 1776, and the signing was 1784, right? The Declaration of Independence of Mexico was 1810, and the signing was 1821. One all over the world recognize the Declaration of Independence as the beginning of the nation. Mexico, here in the United States, don't recognize the Declaration of Independence in 1810, but only name 1823, so many years after that. So the question to ask would be, why? There are many answers to that question, but one question, according to historian McWilliams, said that this shift served to create a powerful myth. A powerful myth. So what was that myth? First, it elevated the romanticism of the mission era. And then it erased also other stories. So powerful. It's not a minor thing, very, very powerful. So it justifies something that's still happening right now, the history and the stories of one group over all the others. So this myth softened the colonization and the erasing of culture. However, Tuolumne County is not a place of a single story. It is a place of multiple stories, a multicultural beginning. So tonight, we are going to talk about those things, and I invite you to remember that Tuolumne County was built by many hands, many cultures, and many people. And tonight, we turn forward the fuller story, beginning where all stories begin, with the Me-Wuk, here in Tuolumne, because it's where all these stories begin. And your presence here today tells us something very important, that we are ready to discover those multiple stories, that we are ready to live together, and we are ready to look eye to eye and acknowledge all those stories. And with that, I would like to invite my colleague, Christina, to talk a little bit about some guidelines before we move to a blessing ceremony.
If you must talk, please excuse yourself in the immediate area. And lastly, say "oh." It is acceptable to say "oh" loud and proud. Often hearing a bunch of these responses lets the dancers and singers know that they are appreciated. This can vary by tribe, but it is a widespread practice in our region. We have handouts at the table when you first walk in if you'd like to learn a little bit more about these respect protocols and how we can continue to respect the singers and dancers. And with that being said, if everybody could rise and gently make their way outside to enjoy the ceremony.
After that amazing ceremony, I've never seen anything like that here on campus, so it's pretty special for me to see that, and I hope for you too. So we have two speakers for you today. The first one we have is Dr. Stephanie Beaver Guzman, who is an enrolled member of the Hoopa Valley Tribe and also a faculty member here at Columbia College and Modesto Junior College in Ethnic Studies, and has been a counselor in the past.
We also have today Kyle Cox, who is a member of the Tuolumne Band of Me-Wuk Indians and serves as the tribe's cultural resource manager, where he oversees the protection and preservation of culturally significant resources.
Without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to my dear friend and colleague, Stephanie.
Hello, welcome all of my relations. It's so nice to see all of you. Sadia, it's wonderful to see so many people here. And it's hard to step away from ceremony, right? It's so hard to say, sorry, we gotta cut if we have a program. And so it feels so good and so wonderful to see all of you and that you're interested and are present. And a big oh! All of the people who set up this room, who organized this event and this series, and all of you for making time in your day to drive, whether it was just down the road or from Modesto or elsewhere. I know we've got people from all over the place joining us, so thank you so much for being here. I've got about 25 minutes with you, and really my goal is to give you the best breadth and depth possible in those 25 minutes of offering perspective about the gold rush from California Native people. And that's kind of hard to do. It's also sensitive material, right? And so I try to be unapologetic, but also really sensitive that there's a lot of trauma and wounds when we talk about this. And so I have some slides that I'm not going to directly read from. So I will not be speaking from these. They're more visual aids to help kind of fill in some of the context for you. I'm just going to share for myself. My colleagues introduced me, and I'm sharing this information as a Hoopa tribal member, but also as a Native scholar, and also someone who's lived in Tuolumne County for 10 years. And I've been navigating this experience of having the gold rush celebrated in every space, and the voices of Indigenous people rarely being present. So I have a lot of gratitude for the organizers of this event to make space to hear our voices, because our perspectives are usually not included in history books or in our classrooms. And so I just appreciate you being here and being willing to make this happen. So when we talk about, I'm going to come over here because I can't see very well. We're going to talk about history from this different lens. And because, I'm a nerd and a professor, right? I'm going to throw out some academic language for you, because these terms actually help us understand why we don't hear about Native perspectives and why we only ever celebrate the gold rush, right? And so these terms will become embedded. I'm not going to bore you with all of that, but my goal is to try to, when we're talking about what am I really going to talk about, I'm going to share the context of California and let you know what was happening across the state. And my dear friend Kyle is going to focus more on the Me-Wuk perspective, right? So I'm going to share perspective with you so you understand some of the things that were going on at the time. And so when we talk about who's Indigenous, right? We're all Indigenous to somewhere. Our family lineage, we are Indigenous peoples. But we're talking about Native peoples. We have all across the Americas, right? That's one perspective. Throughout the United States, we have over 575 federally recognized tribes. Within California, we have over 107 who are federally recognized, and over 70 different tribes who are currently seeking federal recognition from the government, like our Southern Sierra Me-Wuk relatives, who've been fighting the government for over 40 years about that. So before contact, right, we have all of these distinct cultural groups across the state, whose languages, ceremonies, and practices are different. And this is pre-contact, and then in a really short period of time, a lot of treaties that were absolutely not ratified or followed, even though that's how California gained land which to govern, right? And then we have our current reservations that you see on this map, little tiny specks of blue. My tribe, the reservation I'm from, is from Humboldt County, the Hoopa Valley tribe. So way up there, right? But we've got Native people all over. We have Native people still living and occupying all of these spaces, even those who are not California Native, those who are not recognized. So we got to see who are Native people, right? We talk about Native American people, California Indians, and so I just want to show some representation here. Married into a Me-Wuk family, and I'm Hoopa, and so here's some images of our ceremonies, our regalia, our dancers, right? Some you can recognize, you just saw. And on the far right is a Hoopa man. And we have so much diversity within California, but the tribes who are originally here, and of course all of those tribes who have been relocated here. And these are our homes, right? Our round houses, our umachas, the cedar plank houses on the far right. That's my homeland. And so I'm giving those visuals for you so it's not just Native people in the abstract, because our Native people are sitting right next to you. We're your professors, we're the people who clean, we're the people who organize, we're your leaders. We're all around you, and we don't fit a specific stereotype that you might have in mind about who we are. And so in ethnic studies, right, what I'm a professor of, Native American studies, we talk about master narratives. The story of Columbus, right, that's the original master narrative. A story that gets told, celebrated, believed, in one perspective, where this guy gets a holiday, right? But we also have other perspectives that are historically not in those history books, or just a small sliver. And those are counter-narratives. And so for me, navigating, living in Tuolumne County, it's been hard, right? And there's different costs with having another voice and another narrative, and usually no one wants to hear it. And what's connected to master narratives are stereotypes and assumptions, usually negative, about the groups that they're being talked about. And so I invite you to think about the common perceptions you have heard or you might have of our indigenous peoples here in Tuolumne County or elsewhere. And I challenge those perceptions with a very academic term called survivance. I didn't learn about this until I was in my doctorate program. It is where we are more than surviving. We are more than just resisting erasure or master narratives. And we are thriving. We have an active presence. So this term survivance is used to describe indigenous people today. And how it's kind of countering some of these ideas that, oh, they all died out because of disease, right? But we're actively here reclaiming and engaging in ceremony. On the table, you'll see some basketry that I've brought and several books if you're curious about learning more. Because again, we've only got like 25 minutes or less than that, right? But survivance is this active presence where we get to decide as Native people who we are and what we look like and how we are supposed to look like. Before I got my chin tattoo, yep, that's a tattoo, I just looked like, a nice white lady, right? My identity was usually only questioned by non-Native people. If I tell a Native person I'm Hoopa, I'm Me-Wuk, they say, oh, okay, cool, and they tell me a connection they have. But our identities are complex, and we look like all kinds of different backgrounds. And so survivance is reclaiming and challenging these assumptions and ideas about who we are. I'm going to move on from this, but this is explaining what settler colonialism is, which is this idea we think colonization happened at the gold rush only, or it happened at first contact only. But this idea is saying that actually The goal of this type of colonization is land, and what happens when you have people on that land. So let's just say I want the chair you're sitting in, but you're sitting there. How am I going to take that? I either overthrow you, or I use all of the means that I can, but then like for anyone who's still sitting in all of these chairs, I'm then going to get to control the narrative about, well, they're not even really indigenous. They're so watered down, they're not anything, right? Any of these negative perceptions that we might have. And so settler colonialism is a structure that's embedded in our society. And this is why we don't hear other perspectives. This is why we don't hear about Native people's stories or their contributions to this land before, during, and well after the gold rush. So we could talk about several different aspects in California history, but we are focusing on one content today, right? And so there's estimates that over 90% of the original indigenous population absolutely disappeared, but it's not just because of disease. It was because intentional, structured, well-funded violence towards Native people, because we needed land, right? Our state needed land so that we could, of course, search for gold, and of course, search for our American dream, right, which is deeply connected to land. So how we even consider the gold rush truly reflects our own conditioning of those master narratives that we've been exposed to, right? And for someone who's mixed like myself, I have family lineage with people who were actively involved as minors in the gold rush, and then I have family members who were absolutely negatively impacted by the gold rush, right? So I'm not here to target you or say, how dare your ancestors, right? But I'm here to share information, and I tried to pick out concepts that usually people don't know, or create, again, that breadth, like covering different sub-content, and going a little bit in depth. So if we think about Native people in connection to land, what happens if your medicine and your food is connected to the land, but the land is changing, right, because of this rush for resources? We know that all of these different aspects of the environmental impacts of the gold rush were occurring, right? Everything from forests and timber, waterways being polluted, and then livestock impacting our natural resources and medicines. But we have this pattern of resource rushing, and it started with the gold, and then it went to timber and fish, and presently we're in the green rush. Anyone know what that is? Has to do with weed. So anyone who likes 420 or smoking marijuana, right, whether you're for or against that, we have that happening all over California. Illegal and legal marijuana grows. Exploitation of the land continues for profit, right? And so the violence towards our land, there's a strong link between that and the violence towards indigenous bodies. So one of the biggest things that was happening at the gold rush, shortly after California became a state, is these different laws developed. And funny enough, they have the term the protection of Indians. And so I'm going to tell you some of the broad points, right? But one of the first things is that counter to our actual system where you're innocent until proven guilty. Indian people, California Indian people, were actually criminals until they could be proven innocent, if they could. And any complaints that were made before justice of the peace, there was no case where a white man can be convicted of any offense upon the testimony of an Indian. Additionally, it established slavery, indentured servitude, women were being sold into brothels, right? There's huge stories in my community where in our coming of age ceremonies, our young women get these tattoos. And then there would be miners and soldiers who were like, oh, well, free game, they're a woman now, fresh meat. And our young women would be kidnapped and taken, right, because they were women. And so these practices of even our tattoos ended up being diminished or not safe to continue, our ceremonies as well. And so if there was someone who had an Indian child and wanted to keep it, they could go to the justice of the peace and have care, custody, or control, right? Additionally, if you were a Native person and you were charged with something and that charge involved a fine. A white community member could then basically pay for that and take control of you, right? Until, as long as you treat them humanely, feed and clothe them properly, and give an allowance, right, then the bond would be taken. There was also another section that talked about if you have someone who is found loitering and strolling about or frequenting public places where liquor is sold, begging, or leading an immoral or, I don't know how to say that word, course of life, they would be liable to be arrested on the complaint of any reasonable citizen. Right? So even walking down the street, and if you're near a tavern, that's how close do you have to be from that tavern to be viewed as, okay, time to go be punished, right? To be put in charge of custody, right? But then you could also be hired out to the highest bidder. This is an article from one of our pieces from Jack Norton, one of the earliest California scholars, who kind of put some different letter pieces together, right? So this is talking about the impact just someone being arrested for having young children, Native American children who have been kidnapped. And they were going to be given homes and actually sold. Native children could be sold until the 1950s legally, and whose parents were killed, right? And so we have an estimated 10,000 Native people who had been indentured or sold just between 1850 and 63 alone. Another aspect is these are militias. And this is where we have the federal and state government paying individual citizens to prove they had helped terminate Native peoples. So for those of you who may not be able to see in the back, over 35,000 Californians served in these volunteer militias between 1851 and 1866. And this is the hard content. $5 for every severed head in Shasta City, 25 cents for a scalp, 25 cents per scalp, man, woman, or child was the state of California's bounty. In just 2 years, 51 and 52, California paid out $1 million of back then money to militias. In 1857, it was 400,000. So our state was born of genocide, right? And this was happening at a time where we have other relatives who are making their American dream happen. But when mining is getting scarce, the bounties help support, right? And so there are some different dollar amounts per day. And it's debated on whether or not this happened right here in Tuolumne County or not. But a scholar by the name of Benjamin Madley published a book called American Genocide like 9 years ago, where he said the same things that Native scholars have been saying for years, right? Where he validated what they said, and he actually literally also counted bodies. This shows the expedition against Indians by some of the counties and the dollar amounts. This is from the Comptroller of the State of California, expenditures for military expeditions against Indians, and that is just like a 1851 to 59 time period. This shows some of the dollar amounts that the federal government was compensating California and different parties for their expeditions against Native people for these bounties. There's a Native scholar that talks about comparing the gold rush, if you're a Native, to the show The Walking Dead. Raise your hand if you've seen The Walking Dead. Okay, it's a mixed room. It's about zombies, right? Current day apocalypse, people turn into zombies, they're coming after you for your brains. Now, in this article that this particular author talked about, the gold rush wasn't that different for Native people. It was the end of the world as they knew it, and people were coming because they could get paid for their head, or scalp, or body parts to prove it, right? And so it's a kind of drastic analogy and pretty sickening to your stomach if you think about it, right? But that same sickness in your stomach is what myself and many of my relatives feel when people are only ever talking about the celebration of the gold rush. When there's no space or even one sliver of, well, there were some pretty messed up things also happening, right? And so I'm not saying that we do away with celebrating the gold rush. I'm just asking for a small pause. Because in Humboldt County, in my community, in just one small, 14-year period, there were 56 massacres of Native people. But we're not talking about that. This is a quote from someone here, right? I'm not going to say some of this language, but the good haul of a derogatory term. One white man was killed, 38 bucks killed, 40 women and children taken. May 23rd, 1863, the Indian must be exterminated or removed. This may not be the most Christian-like attitude, but it is the most practical. Again, because we are dealing with issues of needing land, and the people interfering with that land were the indigenous people of this land. So these are two books that talk about this specifically. If you're interested in learning more, at the end you can come take some pictures. I've got 25 books up here covering different topics if you want to learn more instead of just this very brief introduction. But this master narrative and the exclusion or the perception that we all died of disease and anyone who's here is just super watered down or whatever, right? 10 years ago at Sacramento State University, a U.S. history professor asked a Native student to leave their classroom because the student said, "Why aren't you talking about the genocide of California?" He said, "Actually, that wasn't a genocide, that was disease," right? And it led to the student being dismissed from the class, and a whole thing happened. And the student, I have a quote from her, it says, "It's like cowboys and Indians modern style. Today, instead of us getting scalped and killed and enslaved or whatever, we're in a classroom fighting for the truth." Because we tell our children and our relatives this history. We all know this. But I wonder how many of you learned that history in elementary or high school or college. We have the most educated and sought-out professionals, right? Doctors, lawyers, judges who don't know this, but make laws and decisions and carry these assumptions and negative stereotypes about our community without truly understanding what it even took to survive that type of era, right? And so I again bring up this term survivance, because the gold rush is truly complex, right? We have things to celebrate. We also have things to question. And what stories do we tell? What stories are we going to share with our community members? And what do you do when you start to know, oh shoot, right? I've only ever celebrated this. I'm really proud of my third generation family member who did all of this stuff for our family lineage. A New Zealand scholar brought this term over 20 years ago, Decolonizing Methodologies. It's a published book that talks about how to recenter indigenous voices and how to try to not recreate harm in those communities, and how basically not be negative or repeating the same type of things. This is used typically in research, but it has a lot of community applications. And so the biggest thing for all of us is asking, are you interested in learning more? It's a lifelong process. And in your sphere of influence or power, are you inviting our indigenous leaders to your table? Are you going to pay them for the services you're asking them to do? Right? How are you going to compensate them for their time? So I think that it's really important when we start thinking about master narratives and counter narratives to ask, to always try to learn from the source instead of about the source. And know that we all have blind spots. Can you raise your hand if you learned one new thing so far in these 20 minutes that we've had together? Okay. So you had a blind spot, right? And maybe it was a small blind spot, maybe it was big. And that's absolutely okay, right? That's why we take ethnic study classes or seek out Native authors. And so the goal is to really think about how you can continually learn. You can evaluate where you have influence or power, how you can contribute, or just think about, what does this even look like for you? Right? It might just be processing and deciding you want to learn more. I think that it's really important in the one-on-one level when you hear someone say things that are damaging or show that maybe they have some negative perceptions or they have stereotypes, where you can kind of challenge those things softly one-on-one, or just really try to continue learning and see what makes sense for you. So we kind of did a very brief overview about bounties, about the state-funded millions and millions of dollars that our federal government and our state government did to help private citizens help take care of a problem, right? And it's rooted in this system of erasure that continues today. And acknowledging that we really do have this incredible diversity of Native people who are active, just like you saw outside, right? People who left their 9 to 5 to come and share ceremony with you and bless our space. Tengi Kamu Sadia, thank you so much for sitting and being present. I know this is a really, truly brief intro to some of the atrocities of the gold rush, but I hope that it encourages you to seek out more information and understand that you can go down some deep rabbit holes, but at least this is a breadth of content that maybe you didn't know before. I like to acknowledge that you taking time in your day to drive here, be here, and that's taking responsibility, right? We start the day off with a land acknowledgement, an acknowledgement of this land and the history, but I like to push those land acknowledgements a little bit more and invite people to take active responsibility in their own learning. And so you're already doing it and you're here. I hope that you continue in other ways, and I just thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephanie. Always a tough act to follow. Just full of knowledge, and I try to hope to have a sliver of information that I can share with you guys that she does. Me-Wuk, Kane Yase, Kyle Cox, Kane Luxon, Sakane Mu. Greetings, my name is Kyle Cox. I come from the land of Sopru. Tuolumne, Me-Wuk Indian Reservation. And I'm here to share with you some of our tribal history out there in the Tuolumne Rancheria. I don't know where the thing is to advance slides. Where is it at? Okay. All right. First slide is our tribal government administration building. It looks a little different now, but that's the same building our government has been operating out of since the 70s. And that's where I work, and several of the others that were here with our dance group work there as well. 1806 is the first recorded contact with non-native explorers in our area. Outside the Stanislaus River, that's where Gabriel Moraga's expedition met up with some Me-Wuk folks down by the river basin. They were trying to expand the mission project going through the state of California at the time, looking for new places to build these missions. When they got to this part of Tuolumne County, the tribal people in the area fled up to the hills to take a defensive position and wait these explorers out, which they eventually did. The explorers just realized it wouldn't be worth their time and resources and decided to move on to other places to try to further their mission project. That's why you don't see any missions in this part of the state. We jumped forward quite a bit after that to the start of the gold rush here in the Sierra Nevada rivers. A big part of that is Woods Creek, all the gold that was found in there. It was a really difficult time for Native Americans in this area throughout the state, as Stephanie explained, dealing with displacement, government-funded genocide, and loss of hunting grounds, homelands, loss of life, loss of loved ones. And it's, like she said, it's something that is looked at from a very different perspective if you grew up in this mother-lode kind of area, and a very different lens if you're native. It's not looked at with the same fondness. We have elders that are very opposed to anything that is gold rush related, miner related, prospector related. We had an opportunity to put a piece of imagery from our culture, our umachar bark, cedar bark houses, on a patch of a fire department, but on that same patch, they had a gold prospector, a miner, leaned over in the creek, gold panning, brought it to our council, our tribal council, and a few of our elders stood up and said, no, we don't want to be associated with that imagery, with miners, with gold mining, with the gold rush. We understand it's a very big part of the history throughout here, but it's a very bloody and tumultuous time for us. So, elders being the ones that we look to for answers when we don't have them, we listen to them, and we decided that wasn't for us at the time. After that, we have 1852, 18 treaties, we call them the 18 unratified treaties, that were submitted to the U.S. Senate, but they were never ratified. They were hidden for decades. Those treaties promised Native people in California millions of acres of land that would have equated to almost the size of San Bernardino County, which I believe is the biggest county in the state of California. Now when you look at a map of Indian-owned lands, trust lands, fee lands, tribal lands, whatever you want to call it, they are just tiny dots on a very large map. Not like the Navajo Nation or other large swaths of tribal land. They're very parceled out, checkerboarded throughout the state, and that is in part due to the unratified treaties of 1852. In 1910, the BIA purchased 289 acres from J.H. and Caroline Smith. The BIA at the time was actually called, it was part of the War Department, which just kind of gives you a glimpse into what the relationship was between the U.S. government and Native Americans at the time. The people that oversaw us were also the same people that oversaw wars with foreign enemies, which we were looked at in that same vein. After that, we have another big moment for the Tuolumne Band of Me-Wuk people. Leaders from our tribe, as well as several other tribes in the Central California area, gathered outside Ione, California, on a piece of ranch property. They constructed an effigy, created a pyre around that effigy. The effigy I'm talking about had a sign hanging from his neck that says Digger on it. That's why it's called the Burning of the Digger effigy. The term digger was a catch-all term for natives of the Central California area because we have a tendency to dig for root plants, whether it's medicines, foods, wild onions, wild potatoes, angelica root, soap root, all these different things that we use for sustenance, medicine, and otherwise. They would see us doing that and they're like, those are digger Indians. That term definitely got used as a slur in the same way that another very similar sounding word is used as a form of oppression to dehumanize the natives of this area and make it easier to treat them as lesser than. In this picture in the front, the man with the stick in his hand, that is Jack Bailey. He's from the Tuolumne Rancheria. And there's several leaders in this photo from different tribes throughout Central California. This is the day that tribes decided we will not be referred to by that term. You'll be Me-Wuk, Maidu, Homo, Nisenan, whatever it was, Yoka, whatever tribe was there. Most of us use the term lot of tribes do throughout the United States that describes people as the term for what our tribe is called. Me-Wuk means people. Can't read from the side. Who set this up? In 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act was passed. It decreased federal control and increased self-governance. This was huge for tribes all throughout the United States, good and bad. The self-governance part is obviously a positive, but what happened with a lot of this landless Indian kind of approach was rounding us up and putting us on the reservations to, give us our land of our own, but hopefully decrease conflicts happening in the surrounding areas where Native communities were meeting up with these, influx of people coming for California gold or whatever type of drain they were chasing here in the state. In 1935, the government documents of our tribe were drafted and approved the following year. We used what was called a boilerplate constitution, essentially a fill-in-the-blanks constitution, just given out as a template. We definitely amended it and adjusted it as the times have changed, as our needs for our peoples have changed. And that is the year that we were able to do that. This is the big one, 1940 to 1990. Our tribal people have endured extreme poverty, racism, addiction, and the boarding school system. Our tribe wasn't hit as hard with the boarding school system, but if you're familiar with that, it started in Tacoma, Washington, late 1880s, quickly spread throughout the U.S. That's where the term "kill the Indian, save the man" comes from. It was kind of a change of philosophy from the government-funded militias that the state and many others realized was just going to be too costly, whether it was from an optics standpoint or a financial standpoint, so they decided that this would probably be the best way to go forward, is to get tribal people to assimilate into non-tribal culture, or white culture. These schools were guised as kind of vocational schools at some times, but they were just breeding grounds for all the ilks of society that happen with children, whether it's physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect. If you're familiar with Orange Shirt Day that started in Canada and started working its way down here to the U.S., there's a lot of mass graves associated with these boarding schools. Over in Carlisle University in Pennsylvania, you can take tours of the facilities, and there's old jail cells there on the school grounds with little tiny shackles. Kids as young as 6 years old would be taken away from their families, taken away from their villages, brought to these schools, forced to cut their hair, change their name, meaningful names given to them by their families, by their communities, and pick a name that was, more proper American white name. They were not allowed to speak their languages, practice any of their traditions, cultures, or ceremonies, sing their songs. I've heard stories from elders that attended these schools, and they're horrific. They sound like, whenever someone talks about boarding schools, it sounds like they're talking about this long forgotten time, before society became civilized. And society's always known that there's certain things you don't do to children, but for whatever reason, that was forgotten about in this time period. I can't imagine as a parent having my 6-year-old taken from me. I don't speak the language of the people that took them. They don't speak the language of the people that took them. I don't know where they're going. They don't know where they're going. I don't know when they're coming home or if they'll come home, and they don't know that either. Many times these students would kind of age out of the boarding schools if they made it that long, and they would be just kind of returned back to their communities but not as the person they were before. You're being kicked out of this school now because you're too old to be there, and you have to go back to this community that you haven't seen for maybe a decade plus, and you don't speak the language of anyone in there anymore because you've forgotten the language. It was beaten out of you. You don't know how to participate in the ceremonies anymore because you were told to forget to do those things. It was a very harsh time for our most vulnerable of our members of our community. The extreme poverty, you can see it here in this photo, these shacks, these shanties that these tribal people are living in. This was very common all up and down the state. They would get paid fractions of what their non-native counterparts would get paid. We have the big West Side lumber mill right outside of Tuolumne. Several of our relatives have worked there from its inception to when it last ran, and they were getting paid pennies compared to what the rest of the laborers were getting paid out there, and that leads to the extreme poverty. Racism abundant throughout this time period, and still to this day. I have stories from one elder about walking to school and getting hit with rose vines by the local school kids, and there was nothing they could do about it because the retaliation would be much worse than what a child was doing with a rose vine. Tried to go to the local bar with her husband, and there's a sign inside that bar that said, "No dogs or Indians allowed." And she knew that sign was in there and told him, "We can't go here." He said, "No problem, we'll go in there, it's fine." It was not fine. They were forced to leave immediately. That same type of sign was still at one of the local bars down in Jamestown called the Rawhide Saloon until I believe like 2012 or 14. One of our tribal members was there and decided that it wasn't such a funny, piece of history and got that sign out of there. With the poverty and the racism and just that loss of hope that comes along with all those things, you have addiction, whether it was alcohol, early on, all the different types of illegal substances, heroin, methamphetamine, whatever it might have been at the time. We were hit very hard by that. Statistics of poverty, addiction, domestic abuse, all these different things that you don't want to have extremely high numbers in. Natives are always disproportionately very high in those statistics. It was tough growing up out there in the 80s and the 90s when there wasn't a lot of job opportunities in the town of Tuolumne. And I can imagine it was much worse before those decades that I can remember, just from talking to my parents, talking to my grandparents. But things changed, times changed. In 2001, we established gaming in Tuolumne. That was huge for our tribe, huge for our individuals that are members of our tribe. It allowed us to start filling the needs that our people had, whether it was employment needs, whether it was higher education, starting our scholarship program, sending a lot of our youth to college to get their degrees. We were able to establish our health clinic, which on the back end of things extended our elders' life expectancy. We have more 80-year-old elders now than we ever have before. We also have more elders than we ever have before. And a huge part of that is access to affordable health care. Ease of access. It is a mile away from the entrance of our rancheria. I'm really proud of my tribe in that way, that when we established gaming, we made sure that we took care of the most important things first. We made sure that we established health care to take care of our elders who lived a rough life, make sure that the end years of their life were as good as they could be. We made sure that our young ones were getting the best education that we could provide for them and could get these degrees that they need to get these sought after jobs. So we bookended ourselves in the most positive way before anyone received any money from gaming. We also established our social services department, our housing department was already established, but this allowed us to strengthen it a lot more. Automotive training facilities, expanded our education department immensely. We all used to go to school, or go to the after-school program at this place called the Blue House. It was a renovated HUD home from the 1980s, kind of just go somewhere to go do your homework after school, but it has since become adult education, help our high school kids prepare for college, and then down by where our main government building is, there used to be a baseball field, but when COVID hit, we were granted some AARP funds, and that allowed us to build our new learning center. So now we have our recreation department, our early education department, so K through 6th, and then we have our language program down there as well. Carlos Giesdorf, the leader of our dance group that was out here earlier, he's our language specialist. He likes to say he's not fluent, but he's the most fluent guy I know in our tribe. I think he's just being humble. We get the 5-minute note, okay? But I'm just really proud that our tribe has made those decisions to make sure that we're laying a foundation that strengthens our tribe for the future, realizing that there's more to be done than driving the new car, having the new purse, doing whatever it is you do with your money. As you can see from this second picture right here, our main tribal government building is right next to our ceremonial house. Even through all the changes that we've gone through as a tribe, we've always kept that center. We've always kept our beliefs and our ceremonies right at the heart of our community. And I think that keeps us grounded and makes us who we are. I'm very proud of my tribe, very proud of my family. If you look at this other picture, I had to throw that in. That's a little bit of self-promotion or whatever you want to call it. I got my dad, my uncle, and my other uncle right here when they were young boys out in front of our ceremonial house. And my son was one of the ones that was out here dancing earlier. And I think that's really what makes us who we are as a people is, our language, our beliefs, our ceremony, how we treat each other, how we treat guests on our land, always being hospitable, always looking out for each other, giving everybody second chances. I know I'm running short for time, so I'll just end it now and say thank you all for being here, letting me speak with you. And come on.
Thank you so much, Kyle and Stephanie. And I invite everyone to take a deep breath together. It is a lot. And this shows us where we have been, but it's up to each of us where we are going together. The idea of this speaker series was born of thinking that we are living complex times and also milestones for the country. 250 anniversary of the country, 75th anniversary of Tuolumne County. So I want to leave you just with that thought. We know where we have been as a nation. I invite you to make the future broader and more meaningful for each of us, for everyone. And we hope to see you in 2 weeks for the next speaker of the Chinese culture, and the following one every month until June. And we want to let you know about transportation.
Thank you, Mercedes. Just a quick note about transportation. If you took a shuttle, you'll meet it right at the same spot where it dropped